Hello everyone, and a warm welcome on behalf of Gayfield Creative Spaces and Creative Scotland, our co-sponsor, to the fourth in our series of Twilight talks. Tonight's talk is called Digital Counts, and it's particularly fitting to be here at our partner venue, Creative Exchange. Our own collaborative hub at Gayfield at the top of Leith Walk is an upcycled tyre depot, and it's wonderful to see the use of this historic building, which has been transformed into such a central point in our city's digital landscape. Many thanks to Charlotte, Sophia and Aga for their help. Thanks also to the regular co-workers at Creative Exchange for their patience as we prepared for this evening's talk. A particular thanks to Jim Galloway, who couldn't be here this evening, of City of Edinburgh Council, one of our city's digital pioneers. He recognises and makes real the concept of connectivity in our city, reaching out from Creative Exchange and enabling the microeconomies which grew up and around creative individuals and creative hubs, and from which the wider economy so clearly benefits. Tonight, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome three practitioner pioneers. All have a teaching and research commitment, and in their use of progressive design technologies, they've each, in their contrasting ways, enabled others, and indeed Scotland, to stand a little taller. From Edinburgh's College of Art, University of Edinburgh, we welcome Geoffrey Mann. Known for his artistic eye and contemplative and rigorous approach, Geoff has works in several international collections, including the Museum of Modern Art and the Museum of Art Design, both in New York. This year, in a rather more modest venue, his piece Nocturne can be seen in our Garden Party exhibition at Gayfield. And from Glasgow School of Art, University of Glasgow, we warmly welcome Alan Shaw. Alan is a guru for many textile designers in Scotland, and together with Vicky Begg, run a vital resource for makers and researchers, the Centre for Advanced Textiles. I'm delighted to see tonight, where is she sitting? Katie, where'd you go? Oh, there, you're right in front of me. I'm delighted to see our very talented curator of India Street at Gayfield, Katie West, together with our visiting very talented designer, Lokesh Guy. Katie, Lokesh and I can certainly vouch for the flexibility and above all quality of the work of the Centre for Advanced Textiles. CAT's rapid response times have been never more welcome. And finally, to introduce our talk, I welcome Josie Steed of Gray's School of Art, Robert Gordon University, Aberdeen, course leader for fashion and textile design. I know Josie by reputation, though we've only just met today. Among our aims at Gayfield, we hope to provide a focus for where design meets health and well-being. It's particularly gratifying, therefore, to have Josie with us. Robert Gordon is the lead institution of the Second Skin research project, and Josie works alongside colleagues at Duncan of Jordanstone, University of Dundee, and Ulster University in Belfast, into this groundbreaking research initiative that develops new textile solutions to help alleviate chronic medical problems. So, Geoff, Alan and Josie, and to all present, welcome to Gayfield at Creative Exchange and to our Twilight talk, Digital Counts.
First of all, I just wanted to give you a little bit of introduction about myself. As John just explained, I'm working at Gray's School of Art in Aberdeen. I'm kind of as both a kind of academic researcher and lecturer. And my background is in textiles, specifically kind of 3D knitted textiles and knitwear. That's where my kind of interests lie. And I've had a real interest in kind of the pervasive nature of textiles and how that as a key component is a key component of contemporary material culture. As part of kind of my recent research, I've worked on a number of knowledge exchange programs and collaborative funded projects, which have recently, as John just said, included kind of looking at textile healthcare products. So first of all, I just was going to talk a little bit about some of the projects, just to introduce you to some of the projects. I've worked on a project called Second Skin, which is a co-design advanced textiles for health and well-being. Now this project has just come to an end, but it started off with a small seed project I did, which was seed funded by the Scottish Academy of Fashion, which was set up across Edinburgh College of Art Heriot Watt and RGU, Robert Gordon University. And we were initially looking at how to embed information to textiles using digital smart textiles. And this was then followed by a project called Future Textile Visions, which looked much more at it from a kind of Scottish context and how we could bring collaboration across academia and manufacture to really explore where new textile products might go. And then this project, which I've just been working on now, Second Skin, investigates the application of fashion textiles and technology, and really is looking at the context of this within quality of life, self-esteem, and particularly with people with sort of chronic medical conditions. And this network has brought together researchers across fashion, textiles, product design, and advanced materials. And I think one of the things it brings into question when we're talking about digital tools is, you know, what's the context for really exploring these different kind of technologies and media. And for the project I was involved in, as I said, was looking at kind of health and well-being, which is really looking at a whole new set of issues resulting from aging population, changes in lifestyles, people living longer with chronic health issues. And looking at ways that we can come up with sort of new healthcare solutions that have possible smart or smarter textile materials. And then really to look at, you know, why textiles? And I think that's kind of the key element here for me is really textiles are implicit within our society, they're embedded within our culture, and ultimately they're the interface between us and our skin. So they are the kind of natural kind of material in which to kind of investigate this. So the project I was working at wearable technologies, looking at adaptive fibres, responsive materials that could interact and support different ways of facilitating health and well-being. Just really to put this into a bit more kind of, before we kind of move on to the speakers today, today's talk's really about exploring the role of digital tools within design today, and also I think to explore and to speculate what their role might be in the future, and moving towards more sort of digital, egalitarian and increasingly ubiquitous disappearing technologies that become embedded within our lives. And I think what we're seeing today is the accessibility of digital tools is transforming the nature of our interaction with technology, and it's kind of breaking down boundaries between amateur use and expert, between designers and makers. And I think that's one of the interesting things that we'll be looking at and exploring today. I think for all of us who are interested in digital technologies, we're seeing a real explosion in desktop manufacturing with fab labs, a lot of fab labs kind of, you know, becoming much more accessible and open for everybody to access. I'll just move on to these. I think one of the kind of key things for me in terms of looking at this is my own interest in sort of digital and 3D, and again coming back to my sort of background in knitting, this has been something that I've really wanted to kind of look at, because basically it was the first digital manufacturing tool was a knitting machine, and how that has really kind of changed very quickly in terms of how we're now seeing different, much more innovative sort of digital knitting processes taking place, and in the case here of sort of Nike using 3D printing to now create and manufacture textile, flexible, fused products that can, you know, completely change our relationship with producing new products that are customized, they're specifically bespoke to our own specific needs, and can completely sort of revolutionize the way that we engage with both manufacturers, with Nike, for example, here, and the sort of three-dimensional flexible materials. I'm just now going to hand over to Alan. who's our first speaker tonight, as John just mentioned. Alan is from Glasgow School of Art, the Computer for Advanced Textiles, and he's going to talk now about the work from his own practice, but also the work that the CAT Centre are doing. Thank you.
My presentation is a mixture of quite a few years of work, not so much my own practice, there's bits and pieces of that in here, but it's quite a lot about what I've been involved in since 1998, which was setting up a centre at Glasgow School of Art, which would be three-pronged, where it was all about setting up a facility for, first and foremost, the students, secondly, to work with commercial companies locally and internationally, and also to look in research projects and research within the area. So that's what we set up to do in 1999. I believe that's what we're still doing today. My notes are all on my laptop. So we were established in 2000. I was a master's student at Glasgow School of Art, working along with Bryony here in the audience in silversmithing. And I had come back and done, after doing an undergraduate in traditionally printed textiles at GSA, I went out into the marketplace and did a bit of freelance work and was working with various companies in the traditional sense, and became really frustrated at the lack of accessibility to printed textiles in Glasgow. And I had a few commissions when I left college, and I understood how difficult it was for somebody who was a textile designer to get some fabric printed. There was a few things in Glasgow at the time, a company called DNA, I don't know if anybody ever remembers it, where you could go and book table space, and it was a wonderful idea, but it was a very hard thing to manage. And it kind of dried up after the funding, and basically nobody that graduated who had any interest in their work could ever produce a small run of fabric, and it was something that I wanted to address. So I came back to Glasgow and did a master's in design and was focusing on digital print to textiles, which has been going on really since the 70s and 80s, but in a very, very small manner. But towards the 90s and the late 90s, it was becoming something that was more of a reality. So after I left the master's course, I stayed on as a research student, and my remit was to try and work out how we could set something up at Glasgow using equipment that I had trialled in industry. And in 1999, we got awarded £661,000 to set up a facility at Glasgow School of Art, which was pretty amazing. And the money came from a fund, which was something that colleges don't normally get to do. It was money that's not given out just to set up a normal thing. It was something new that wouldn't normally be in education, because the kit that we were getting was certainly not that was anywhere else in the world. Of course, part of what we were trying to do was set up an external service as well. I didn't know how to do that, so that was quite difficult. We purchased the world's first digital production printer in the world. So that was quite a big thing. There was other digital printers, but sampling machines. So we started off using something which is a textile drum printer, something that was used in the graphics industry, where the print head doesn't move about like your normal printer. The fabric moves, and the print head moves very, very slowly. And so you put your fabric onto a drum, and it prints a metre every 2 hours. And that was the fastest machine you had at that point. It was actually a paper proofing printer, an iris printer, basically modified to print textiles. Then we bought this machine, which was a Stork Amethyst printer in 1999. As I say, this is what we got our funding for, and that is the world's first production printer, and it cost about £160,000. And if I've got one word of advice, I would say to you, never buy the world's first anything. Never. Because unless a lot of people buy the second, the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, you'll find out that a lot of work still needs to get done on the first one. So we had lots of struggle with that, to do with print, really technical things, which was not my background. I'm trained as a designer, I'm not really a technical person. So that machine, we spent lots of time working with print head technology, continuous flow, which was a type of print head technology in the machine. It's quite technical, so I'll not go into all of that because it's kind of ahead of me, really. Then we moved on to a second generation of a machine after the first machine went back, which was a drop-in-demand printer, very similar to the machines that you have at home. This printer prints 8 to 10 linear meters per hour. We still have this machine at CAT at the moment. Of course, what we do, everybody thinks of digital textiles as being very straightforward and very easy to use. It's just basically your printer at home in a studio printing textiles. Well, it's not really that. The fabric and the pre-preparation of the fabric, the application of the dye, the pre-treatment of the fabric, the dye stuffs themselves, the steaming. If anybody comes from a traditional print background, they'll understand how difficult it is to do printed textiles. So if you add digital into that, you would think it would make it easier, but in many senses it makes it more complicated. This is a bullet steamer, which lots of textile designers will be aware of. This is to fixate the dyes which are on the fabric. So essentially what we do is we apply reactive dyes digitally onto a natural substrate. It gets steamed to make the dyes permanent, and then it goes through a washing process. So initially what we were using was kind of sort of upscale household equipment, fancy washing machines. We still use these. That's our first steamer, which is like a wardrobe. That's where the dyes get fixated on the fabric. And this is very similar to what goes on in a traditional process. And a tumble dryer. So that's what we were doing in the early days. And a large rotary iron to finish the fabric. In January of this year, we moved back into a new facility at GSA, and we again invested quite a lot of money, about £100,000 in this production printer, which is capable of printing up to 100 linear meters per hour. So what we found was that while we were satisfying students' needs, commercially we were struggling against quite a lot of external companies who were trying to do a commercial service, and we were finding it difficult to do print runs of between 50 and 100 meters, which this machine can do several of those a day. Of course, when you've got a machine that can produce 500 to 1,000 meters a day, you've got to think about fixating and washing 500 to 1,000 meters a day in a very small space. I would say CAT's footprint is an eighth of this floor space. And these machines generate a lot of heat. Katie can tell you. These are machines from Holland, which we've done lots of research work with, which are machines that you would normally see in industry, but they're much smaller. Well, they're still fairly massive, but they're much smaller than the machines that you would get in industry. That's a full width washing machine, and behind it is a full width fixation unit. That's a fixation unit, which is basically a bigger version of the steamer I showed you a minute ago. So there's a digital element to it. A lot of it isn't digital, but a lot of it is digital. That's the touch screen which controls all of those machines, and which makes a huge difference to whether you're printing onto a wool, a silk, a rayon, a cotton, a linen. And that's just a variety of the things that we can do when we're processing fabrics and controls. We've got full-time dedicated members of staff, and I think that's one thing that we set out to do, which is maybe sets us apart from other colleges in the world that have followed what we've done, is that we put equipment into an educational establishment, but we put dedicated staff to it. And I think lots of times colleges will ruffle up enough money to buy a digital printer, and then they'll just ask the technician to do it part-time. And the problem is that often that person's got other duties, and the assumption is that a digital printer is very easy to run. Initially, it was just me doing everything. So, but you know, there's a lot of admin that comes along with it. There's a lot of pre-production, post-production, shipping, the whole thing. So now we've got 4 full-time members of staff, and it's almost like having an external function company within the art school. So it's a great facility for the students to come down. They come down and they help us with stuff. They do internships 6 to 12 weeks. So they get to work in what is like a production facility within Glasgow School of Art. And that's a fantastic thing for them to be able to do, because I know that I would have relished that as a student when I was there. Last year we printed 20,000 meters square of fabric. Which sounds like a lot, but this year we probably need to print more like 50 to 100,000 meters squared, because that kit isn't given to us this time, it's all to be paid for. And I'll show you some examples of 20% of that turnover comes from online orders now. So we've got an online facility where people can upload their designs, So that brings in the question mark of the accessibility of the technology. This is the new production printer, printing probably one of the most famous textile designs in the world, which we have licensed to print, which is Lucy and Day Calyx design. There was an exhibition at the art school a few years ago of Lucy and Day's work, which not many textile designers should be told who she is, but she created a range of prints in the 50s which were iconic, and the art school then had an exhibition where we spoke to her at great length and persuaded her that we wanted to reproduce it and make them available again. So we produced them in small runs. We ship meters of that all over the world. Very small orders. Somebody from Australia orders a couple of meters, we print it on demand for them and we ship it out. And it's a really special, lovely way to do it, because otherwise it just wouldn't be possible. And everybody gets, even though it's digital, they get their own unique piece of fabric with the flaws and defects and slight colour anomalies. This is a little just quick video of the washing system. So the fabric's coming through the washer, lots of jet sprays within that, going through the steamer, which is acting as a dryer, and there's some calyx fabric coming out at the back, all steamed and washed. I used to take probably 2 or 3 days to do a roll of fabric like that and cut it up into small pieces in the cabinet. And now I can do something, I can do a couple of 100 meters in a few hours if I need to. So it's a massive step up on us as far as terms of equipment. I don't think there'll be any other college facility in the world that's got equipment like that for students to access. But of course, you can make a lot of fabric go wrong very quickly as well. This is a little bit of my work. This is the first textile print that I ever did myself when I was about 14, I think. I'm a big football fan, and at college, I don't know, at school, I really quickly got into production and the separation of fabric, of designs to reprint through traditional techniques. So from a very early age, I knew I wanted to produce textiles. For the last few years, I've been working as a freelance designer, like a lot of textile designers do, and selling designs through agents all over the world. It's a fairly kind of dry, soulless thing to do. You create designs, you ship them off, and you get a check. If you sell some, you get them back. If you don't find out who you sell them to. I don't enjoy that part of the industry very much, but our technology is very good at assisting designers to do that. I probably still see my work in a traditional context. I was taught and trained as a screen print designer, so I notice that a lot now when people come to us, depending on their age, how they use digital tools. And I find that people who brought it up in a traditional way still look at traditional methods and traditional aesthetics, because that's what the industry still is. You walk into IKEA and most things look still traditional, even though they may have digital tools in the production. Approximately 20 billion meters per year are printed. 2% of that's digital production. The rest of it, the 98% is traditional output. And with traditional output, there's a certain aesthetic that goes with that. That's why everybody likes it. That's what we're used to. That's all changing slowly. So what I try and do in my own work is I quite like digital technology to allow me to access equipment and to offer things really quickly. I mean, I remember when I was a freelance textile designer before digital equipment and you wanted to create a range of 20 prints. Well, you had 4 screens and you had to use them very cleverly. Now you don't have to think about that at all. You can have 30 designs with 100 colours in each of them and you print them all next to each other. So it was a bit of a revolution for textile designers that I think we're still trying to get our heads around it. And of course, when you're selling designs on the market, you've got to think about how they're going to be produced. So if 98% of things are still produced traditionally, then you've got to still design for that market. So what I tend to do is still kind of design traditionally, but with the odd tweak here and there with a digital format. Also working at the art school, we get involved in projects. This was some funding that we got to look at. Rennie McIntosh created textile designs. I think when he wasn't doing so well at the architecture, he did a bit of textile design on the side. Don't think he did very well at it. They didn't sell many, but we had some funding where we would reinterpret some of Charles Rennie Mackintosh's textile designs. So that was quite fun. We got to go into the archives, and again, not having digital technology, from digital cameras to scanners, it would have made it such a difficult project where we could go in with kind of relative ease and reproduce some of his prints, finish them how we thought he may have intended, because of course he was designing things in watercolours, never thinking that they could have been produced in that manner because of the technology. They would have been reinterpreted in a traditional manner. So we got to play about, and these were a couple of my prints which were kind of modern takes on interior fabrics which were inspired by Rennie Mackintosh. This was at the Hunterian Gallery. We also had an archival project at the art school where we all had to choose a piece of archival material, and again it was a kind of a reinterpretation project. And I was looking at the work of Gillespie Kidd and Koya, which I was very familiar with. And again, this is a sort of a layout of digital print files on linen, so it's not the best slide in the world, but you can kind of see the combination of colours and things that you can experiment with in one piece of fabric. And as a traditional textile designer, you just can't do that. And it ended up being an exhibition of, I ended up making my things into chairs because I wanted to develop them into a product. So it was a lovely kind of project, and without the technology, it probably would have taken, a lot longer to do. But again, what I ended up coming up with could have been produced traditionally. But talking about some commercial work that we do at the centre, you're probably all familiar with this. We did a lot of work with Glasgow 2014. They wanted to do production in-house or in-country. So this was the medal bearer's dress for the Commonwealth Games. And we spent months and months resourcing fabrics, getting special pre-treatments done to silks that weren't normal stock fabrics. It was a bit of a nightmare of a job, to be honest, because we chose fabrics where there was only a limited shelf life of it. Then there had to be new weaving runs done for the production, different colours, different chemicals, lots of things that make me go crazy, but you wouldn't really understand if you weren't in the middle of it. We printed about 200 metres of this for the dresses, and it was a nice project to be involved in. Alongside that, you're maybe more familiar with that outfit. Again, we produced we're only responsible for the shirts, as in the production of it, about 2,000 metres. That was the first job that printed on our new machine. So every morning when I came in the morning with my wee boys from school, we rolled out a couple of 100 metres of that in the morning before lunchtime. So that was nice to be involved in as well. I know it got quite a reaction. We did all the little Scotty dogs as well. And then we also, and which is one of the most satisfying things about what CAT does, we have people who do interns who maybe don't come from a digital background. This is a girl from South Africa who came and did an internship with us called Shiloh Engelbrecht, who, after doing a 6-week placement at CAT, went and set up her own company called Advanced Textiles, and she's doing really well. She's printing hundreds of metres with us every week. This is a girl in Elena Trilakis in Greece that we print for, and it's kind of surprising because we're based at Glasgow School of Art, the amount of different countries and people that we work with, and it's all to do with the accessibility of it, and I think our attitude to how we receive customers. I mean, I remember phoning up traditional companies when I graduated from college and trying to get prints done, and they're just not interested. We'll print 30 centimetres for somebody and ship it to Argentina if they want. This is an ex-student from GSA who learned about the digital output that we could give her while she was training. Another very successful company based in Glasgow called Bluebelle Gray, a girl called Fiona Douglas, who is again incredibly successful now. So we work with people like that, people like Timorous Beasties who are based in Glasgow. We did all the Timorous Beastie deck chairs, which are at Gayfield at the moment, which look great. And all Katie's India Street exhibition, most of that was printed at CAT. This was a company down in London who, they ring up on a Friday afternoon and need 100 metres for a fashion show the next Friday. And that's the sort of thing, and they want sampling as well before they get the production. We have a lot of ex-students who graduate from Glasgow School of Art who have used us, who have a relationship with us, who are now out in industry. So we work with people like Topshop. We've got designers in all of those companies, and they generally tend to ring us up because they know us, they have a relationship, so it's a lovely stepping stone for us and for them. We work with people like Mulberry as well, again, ex-GSA students, where they're sending us pieces. This was a Julia Verhoeven project where they send us pieces of paperwork and we have to make it into a finished garment for them. I think they only produced 100 of them. They were never in the shops. They were just a specialist thing. Lots of famous people were walking about in them. But then we also do things like a guy comes in from the street, he's a courier, and this maybe opens up the debate on the accessibility of the thing and what things people can do, where he had an idea where he wanted to make tartan army shorts for football fans going to Scotland games. So we helped him do that. He ended up making these things. Lots of work putting the panels together and the construction of that. It all got done in the Far East. But this is somebody who was from Coatbridge in Glasgow who wanted to start up his own company. And here he was standing with me looking very pleased with himself. I'm not sure how well it worked, but I think he got bogged down, in the end with the working with the Far East. He found it difficult, the timelines, the quantities, communication. I'm going to speak a bit about classic textiles as well. We did a huge project with Converse a few years ago where they rang us up and said they desperately wanted to make trainers out of a fabric that we have licensed to print, the designs that you saw printing on the new machine, Calyx. Lucien took a bit of persuading, but eventually we managed to print these. The fabric got prepared chemically in England, it got printed in Scotland, it got sent to China to get made into shoes, came back and got sold in the US, so it had quite a footprint, and digital printing is sometimes seen as quite a sustainable thing, but often that's not really the case. In many ways it is, but it had quite a footprint, that fabric, but it was a really interesting project to work on. It's now on the website. It was a very limited run. I just put together, I've been meaning to do this for years, put a map together of the countries that we regularly ship to. And in the last week or so, we've shipped to quite a lot of these countries. I mean, places that I can't believe orders come in from. Iran, Israel, Australia, New Zealand, United Arab Emirates, because there's people who just really need somebody that they can speak to that understand what they're trying to do and are willing to take on a project with them. And I think that's where we really maybe are slightly different to other companies. We also get involved in research projects. We get some research funding in where we work with companies who don't come from a print background. Possibly they need, this is a project we did with Timorous Beasties where they were looking at combining digital print and digital embroidery. So again, we work with an ex-student who works for an embroidery company in Fife, and it was a really interesting project where they created a product that they had never done before. So it's digital embroidery on digital print. We were working with velvets and linens. This was another project we did with a Scottish designer called Iona Crawford, who we collaborated with Johnsons of Elgin to, and this is some research that I'm currently involved in. I've got some more funding on trying to finally nail how to print to cashmere, which is something that if I can work out how to do that properly, I think I'll have a lot of Scottish clients for that. This is a print to cashmere, but the footprint again, the preparation of cashmere to allow it to be printed is very difficult. There's only certain countries in the world. So we're doing a project at the moment with some chemists down in Leeds where we're looking at pre-preparation. Wool is not designed to be printed onto. That's why it's kind of got waterproof properties. So trying to get the dye stuff into wool is very difficult. So we're doing a project at the moment where it's quite an industrial project, but we're working with Beggs of Ayr, who are probably produce the finest cashmere in the world, to help them. They're doing a lot of printing in Italy at the moment, but we're trying to help them produce some product locally. Sort of cashmere print on Johnsons of Elgin fabric. And then some of the staff in Textiles use the facility as well. This is a weaver, Elaine Bremner in Textiles, who her work's looking at, she was weaving different types of fabric, so man-made and synthetic, that's the same, man-made and natural fabrics, because we print reactive dyes and they only adhere to certain fabric types. She was looking at weave structures how she could weave fabrics, then digitally print to them, and then when they get washed, some of the dye disappears. So she was looking at creating fabrics like that, which was a really interesting project. That was shown at the Lighthouse. We've worked with Glasgow University and looking at stretch fabrics for prosthetic limbs, which again is something was not normally what we're working as textile designers, but you know, the possibility of people having different covers for limbs and colour matching skin types to fabrics. It's quite difficult project to try and get it to look right, but they were really interested in it, and we've done some sampling with them on that. This is just another little research project we did with Bute Fabrics on the Isle of Bute, where they were looking at a reinterpretation project of something that had been produced years earlier with a designer called Suzanne Martin, where again she was looking at traditional aesthetics but output digital. We've had a PhD student at the centre as well for the last few years, and he's an engineer, and he's had some really interesting ideas about taking the technology a little bit further and people's participation in the design process. So there's a couple of little videos here. This was a project we did with Timber Species again, because I know them and they're local and they're always up for a bit of collaboration, where the designer would stand at a workstation and have interaction with the designs, limited interaction I might add, and they could be part of a product being designed. And they would use a wee remote. There's a slide coming up, I hope it works, where images can build up and you can move images and place them in certain areas. And then at a certain point you can decide the colour. There's another video coming where you can that shows that a little bit better. So you can design products especially for yourself. This was another little project we did with Natasha Marshall, another Glasgow company, where you've got options here. You've got little colour swatches, which you've got real-time colour swatches where you can IR readers, and you can click the colours, manoeuvre the designs yourself online. And then you can decide where you want the tree to stop, the colour you want it to be. And then it gets made into a bag and shipped. Most difficult part of that is actually getting somebody to sew the bag up, believe it or not. But that was a really interesting thing and something that they hope to roll out. So obviously we do a lot of work for textile design students at Glasgow School of Art, and fine art students and product design students, and all areas of Glasgow School of Art, not just the textile students. So the Masters Promenade, which is coming up, we do a lot of work with the Master students because they tend to come in without a lot of textile skills. They're not always textile designers. They may be coming in from a ceramics background. So they tend to use not just our digital printing equipment, but our knowledge of print. This is our website where you can go on, have a look at our gallery, look at our base fabrics. You can upload an image tonight if you want to go home, upload an image, order something. And the take-up for that, I was pretty against this because I thought everybody wanted to speak to me on the phone, but they don't really. People want to ring up or just order in the middle of the night, half a metre from the Far East, half a metre of fabric. They don't want to speak to anybody, they just want to do it. And so I've been proved wrong about the power of e-commerce for what we do, because when I ring up a company, I want to tell them who I am, my background, what I'm trying to do. A lot of people just want to have access to the equipment digitally like that. So that's a little preview of the page where you can upload your own designs. Social media is huge as well. We're constantly trying to keep up to date with that, telling people about what we're doing, who we're working with. People love that. People contacting us through social media, examples of what we do. This is the Classic Textiles website that we have, which we've been evolving over the last few years, where people can go on. This is more where you can go on and order a ready-made design, which were all kind of famous in the 50s and 60s. So you can go on here and order 1 metre of fabric and we'll ship it to you. And we're just starting. To be honest, the Classic Textiles is a little bit slow because sometimes people don't want to buy product, and it's something that we haven't been involved in before. And we're collaborating with a company called the Lollipop Shop down in London, who have designed or who have created a new product range called Living Union. and they're hoping to kind of market our classic textile designs as products. So we're showing down at Top Drawer in September with them to develop a product range from our classic textiles collection. I've got a couple of little previews. This is a limited edition Robert Stewart wall hanging, he used to be the head of textiles at Glasgow School of Art. So we're working with the family, obviously, with their consent, and we're creating short run products, which is what the technology is perfect for. Of course, we're trying to reproduce marks and effects that were done through the traditional process, but digitally, so we're trying to be very, very authentic to the originals. These are the cushions. And here's some tea towels coming off the back of the machine, so they really are beautiful. And I'll pass you over to Geoffrey.
Thanks very much, Alan. I just want to say, that was a fantastic overview of the work that the CAT Centre is currently doing, and I think also really where things are going with kind of digital textiles. So what we're going to do is now hand over to Geoff Mann, and then we'll open up the floor to a discussion and to open questions.
First, I'd like to thank John and Amanda Game, actually, who's not here tonight, for the invitation. I don't get to talk in Edinburgh out with university very often, so it's quite good to have a home crowd. Be nice. A quick bit of background, because it kind of helps to understand where I'm coming from with my work. I studied undergraduate in three-dimensional design, actually, with Simon back there, from '98 to 2002. It was during that time where I was first introduced into digital tools. Not digital technologies, it's digital tools such as CNC milling machines, 3D printers, and the first piece I ever made was in 2000. So 3D printers to me aren't new. And they're not new, because 3D printers are about 35 years old, so they're actually fairly established tools in the design process, and the design industry as well. And that's something personally I think people forget. People elevate these tools into this kind of godlike status, so they can do anything, they can innovate. At the end of the day, it's a tool, and a tool in the wrong hands can make very bad objects. And I'll talk about that later on, where I think people are just seduced by technology just now. So we're creating, I know this is a very negative start to a digital lecture, but it's not about that. It's about applied technology. It's about how we can then use technology and have it in line, or have it the synergy with traditional processes. And that's where the majority of my research comes from. It's not about changing perhaps traditional craft processes. It's about creating this new language of process, which is a commonality across all disciplines. So this is kind of a quote I live to within my practice, and it's about this idea of the space between. It's why I use this tool. I can't see what I create sometimes, so I try and work almost this place of intangibility, the points in between two objects. And Deleuze talks about this idea of the objectile. An objectile is an object that hasn't either got to its final stage, but it's just past its starting point. It's the state in between. And I'm really interested in this idea of a state in between, and the title, Materiality of Time, works very well in that sense. So I'm going to show you a series of projects which gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. The first was kind of my infatuation with motion. And motion for me is something that is everywhere, it's every day. But actually we don't observe it, it happens, we don't analyse it. I was interested in obviously the works of Jean-Marie and Edmund Muybridge about the stop motion and kind of stop frame capture animation. And I was interested in, well, what about the points in between? We see, our eyes can only visually see 12 frames per second. We animate at 30 frames per second. But such moths and hummingbirds, you need to use a camera that works at 20 frames per second to actually see what's going on. We miss a lot. We can walk around with our eyes open, but we're actually not really seeing what exists. So I was interested in how we can use technology to just actually open our eyes a little bit further. So this was a project of a series called Long Exposure Series. So I was looking at the idea of a moth, and the way a moth is actually attracted to light. So we're looking at the points in between, if you see, this is a photograph I've taken, and even using a photograph on a long exposure, you get these intermittent phases. You see individual stages, but you don't see this long, sinuous passage of motion. So I started animating it. I could film all day, but I can't really capture the pieces. So I started animating an object, and this small animation is called Flutter. It'll never ever end. It's on a continual long loop. But as the moth flies around this invisible center light source, it creates this amazing trajectory, amazing echo of an object. And then it comes back again. And I was interested in the echo of a trajectory and echo of motion. So the way I did this is, and this is where technology works for me again, I don't make things up. Now, I try and use either animals or I use any source, almost the raw data to create these objects. So with this piece, I set up a, very similar to how you'd, I don't know, create CGI or computer game animation, and created a motion booth with sensors. And then I put a small sensor on a moth and allowed it to fly. So as the moth was flying around the set parameters of a box, lampshade, these sensors were taking every single kind of X, Y, and Z geometry of this piece. From that information, you can then skin it. It's almost kind of, you're engineering the form itself. And using different CAD technology, you can skin the piece and it creates this. So this piece is called Attracted to Light. What's interesting about this is animals don't care about engineering, they don't care about how things work. And that makes very true and very honest objects. But when you start using 3D printers and software that needs geometries and surfaces that don't intersect very clean, they don't like that. So what I found at that point, my language with the guys that were making these pieces, they were going, well, why have you got this very, you have a thing called normals in 3D printing, and that's when triangles invert and flip around. And I was really interested, and they were going, well, you've got a big red area, you've got a hole there. I went, well, that's the moth. The moth is flowing into each other. It doesn't know not to fly back on itself several times. So it's how you use, that language became interesting, because I was forcing these companies to make mistakes. I was asking the technology to do what it didn't want to do. And that's because of the source material coming from it. So once that piece is made, that's 3D printed. So this is SLS, which is a laser sintering process, and it's a polyamide nylon material, which is actually a very beautiful material itself. It has a very porcelain-esque feel to it when you first get out of the machine. Give it a month and then it looks like it's covered in nicotine, it goes yellow. It is UV sensitive. I never wanted to make a lamp. This was never meant to be a product in that sense. This was a hanging sculpture that happened to have a light. It was always an animal. It was always about this light source. Any pieces that I wrote, then it was, oh, it's about the light source. It's not about this lamp. It's become a light quite quickly, mainly due to interest. But I was always interested in the quality of it. So the only point you can see what it is the end profiles. I think I've got a laser. Oof. So the end profiles is where I do a very clean cut of the object, and you get this very symbolic and very, sometimes it looks graphical and simplified form of the moth itself. It was an interesting project, this one, because I accidentally helped MIT at one point, because they were looking into how a bat flies, and they found out that a bat flies asymmetrical, but I found out a moth flies symmetrical. And they were like, oh, we spent thousands and hundreds and thousands of pounds. It doesn't take that sometimes, just use the actual animal, because they were using a lot of animation, and it was the difference between emulation and simulation. There's a really famous quote by the CEO of Pixar, who was talking about how they animate hair on animals. Now, if you animated exactly how the hair on your arm was meant to move, it would look wrong. You have to animate it how it feels, how it should feel. And this is the difference between emulation and simulation. And I found it very fascinating, because your eye wants to see what it wants to see. You can't force it sometimes. So these objects that I create almost have this air of unfamiliar familiarity, where people kind of think they know what they're seeing, or it's a double take to really understand what's going on. So this is the larger piece. This is the larger piece that's currently at the depot at Gayfield in the garden party. And this is called Nocturne itself. This piece was first made in 2000 and something, 2005, 2006, and then recreated for the Jerwood Contemporary Makers Prize in 2009. Subsequently, it's picked up pace, and there's currently larger pieces that it's quite interesting. You can change the scale of an object, because a moth itself, people get quite astonished how small this object is. Moths aren't big. Like, we've all seen them, they're not big objects. I can't make huge pieces from them, but I have. So there's one currently in my studio, which is in Leaf, just across, it was in the shore, it's across the water, which is about 3.5 meters long, and I'm making a new one, which will be bronze cast, which will be about 18 to 19 meters long for a public installation, which changes the feel of the object as well. So again, capturing that kind of trajectory with that scale and not making it like a budgie or a bat is quite interesting. Where the 3D printing works for me, I work across a lot of different kind of creative tools and creative digital tools. It's quite an interesting point for me. The 3D printing created a very tangible object, something you could connect to, you could seal, you could feel. I was interested in how I can make something ephemeral, but it still have this tangibility connected to it. So I stumbled across some technology called subsurface engraving. Now, subsurface engraving, we've all seen it. It's just, the festival has just finished. The tourists have left. Great. And you can get all these little souvenirs of Edinburgh Castle, and they're etched inside a small block of glass. Now, that's an amazing technology, and it's run by, the majority of it's done in China, but there's a really good company in Paris called Vitrix, and they do subsurface engraving on a more creative scale. And what subsurface engraving is a laser going internally in crystal and cracking internally in blocks of glass. So what this creates is this very ghost-like spirit, almost like smoke caught within the object itself. There was 4 blocks, and as the 4 blocks, the moth was flying through each piece. This piece was the start of how I started challenging how I practiced or how I sold objects, in the way that was this one of one, was this one of 30 pieces. So I started actually using what my starting point was time. Now I've got 30 seconds of data. Now 30 seconds of trajectories. 30 seconds of trajectory is actually roughly about 12 meters of length of objects. So I've got 12 meters of blocks that I can create. So when people purchase these pieces or acquire them or go into collections, then they get X amount of length. Once the 12 meters is finished, then that's finished. So it's a true one of one, but I have over 30 different individual pieces out of that one collection, which is a very different way of trying to sell an object, but that kind of helps because of the use of technology at that point. I'll kind of backtrack a quick point, is that I never really knew who I was. I never really knew if I was an artist, a designer, a craftsperson. I did my postgraduate at Royal College of Art in ceramics and glass, but I wouldn't call myself a glassmaker or a ceramicist, even though I do run the glass program at Edinburgh College of Art. I class myself as a creative director. Now, creative director as a title allows me to then cross boundaries and cross disciplines. I can sample a lot of different technologies, but bring them together into one output, and I think that's a healthier place. This idea of either being multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary, floating across different disciplines, is almost where a lot of practitioners are going now. And I think technology has helped us do that. I wouldn't say the learning curve's quicker, but I'd say the accessibility of new technology for the pro and con has actually allowed more designers to do that. So this is the idea of 2,000 frames per second on a hummingbird. So the next piece was called Flight, and this actually processed the attracted light, and I was interested in just looking at pigeons every day. The animal at this point didn't really matter. It was actually just about how an object, how is this idea of flight to motion be able to caught in something that's tangible. So again, I put sensors on a pigeon, let it fly within a very, I wouldn't say concealed space, that sounds horrible, but within a set area, let's say. This was a nice project because my dad, when he was a boy, used to own, well, he used to kind of train tumbling pigeons. Anyone ever heard of tumbling pigeons? Most ridiculous thing in the world. They just fly up and they tumble back to earth. Brilliant. And I was always interested in wondering what that looked like because I'd never seen tumbling pigeons. And this started to allow me to be able to kind of idea of what this motion would look like. It's almost looking at kind of like coining John Martin's solid air. Is that if air was solid, how does something cut through it, create this positive and negative form? And that's what these objects started to do for me. So this is a really basic kind of idea of how I do this project. It's kind of like a three-dimensional flip book. So I get the data, then from the data I've got, I think roughly about, from the birds there's like 45,000 different individual files, and from the files I then have all the XY coordinates, that goes into a different program, and then it's a really interesting game of kind of dot to dot. So you're following the footage at all points, and then you're actually creating it. So, and this is where technology is interesting for me. Don't let it just do what it wants to do. Automated technology doesn't work that well when you're designing because it looks for the quickest and easiest form. So where I would just put this into a computer and tell it to loft, extrude, whatever kind of term it was going to use, it would try and just make it up and look for the easiest and quickest point to point. When in fact that wasn't what the form was doing. It was going usually the hardest way and it was intersecting. So I tried to just let the computer do as little as possible. So I was hands-on a very digital sense. And again, a lot of people that kind of know my practice and think I'm very standoffish, or I don't get mucky as the other one people kind of get annoyed with, because I don't really make any of my work. I source it. Usually I would due to scale or I have a business of practice, but at the same time I like working with collaborators. It's a very healthy way for me to kind of step away and get someone else's opinion about the work. Oh, I'll do that again. So once it's extruded, then you have this kind of really interesting object, an almost apparition, extruded apparition from nothing. So this is just an example of some of the 3D printing. So the first one I looked at, I used for the moth was SLS. Now, the moth is the only piece that I've created that I'll keep in rapid prototype. Well, it used to be called rapid prototyping, now it's called 3D printing, in a 3D printed material. Now, it never sat well with me because I love material. I was always educated in material, understand material, and I always wanted to push, well, anyone can 3D print. My dad can 3D print. He's a retired accountant. So I was kind of like, well, what makes kind of what I do a little bit different than Joe Blogs off the street? And I was quite, well, it's this fusion. Is this then transition into, let's say, an archival material such as ceramics, glass, bronze, silver, any material really that has this tradition built into it. So for me, 3D printing was allowing, again, to challenge what could happen. So this is a Z-Core printed. Z-Core is one of the cheapest kind of production materials to use. You have so many different types of materials. You've seen it everywhere. It's on the news. It's in the Daily Mail. That's how mainstream it's got nowadays. So this object just now, but you can see, which is a good example of that part there. That's because the machine didn't want to print because it didn't think the object should do that, so it just left a hole. So you can't, sometimes the machine is stronger, which is never a good sign. So once I create this piece, then I'll make fiberglass silicon molds and very traditional lost wax casting process for kiln cast glass. This piece is 700 mil by about 40 by 400 by about 400. And this was done in Lhotsky Studios in the Czech Republic. So again, this is an interesting part of my language of process. So it's not just about making the object, it's about finding someone I trust with the object. I've never been there. I've never spoken to them. I only email these guys. So I email them to make very, very kind of classical cast objects. So this is a solid cast lead crystal bird in flight. It's called Flight. I'm not very that imaginative with my titles. This one's Flight. Flight takeoff and flight landing. And it's an amazing piece because it's a piece that has my soul and has my fingerprint all over the object, but I'd never seen this piece until I go to exhibitions. The first time I saw this, and this actual piece was in Bornholm in Denmark, which is a tiny little island just off the Danish coast. And I had never seen this piece. I met it at an exhibition. It was made in Czech Republic, driven up from the Czech Republic to Denmark, and that's when I first saw it. So when I opened the box with the curator, it was the first time I'd ever seen this final piece. It's a risky business. It's not, if you ever know glass casting, it's not a good, healthy one. So this is this different one, just a different trajectory as well. Again, I try and keep the end profile, something that you can have this access point, something you can connect to the object. But at the same time, the ambiguity of the object is something that's very beautiful. So there's a lot of different interpretations of these pieces itself. So I'm going to talk about a different series of projects as well, and this is kind of starting to work, this idea of co-crafting and co-design within my work as well. So this is just a good example, and wow, just great times. I've got a fan right behind me as well. I was interested in how, of the everyday, how something everyday can actually be affected by how an inanimate object or material property could be affected if we lived in, almost like a matrix style world. So this is a very basic animation, and this is the start of me using animation as a sketch tool. I still draw. I like getting back to very kind of quick, brief sketches, and I can take it into a world where I can allow to do these things. So this piece is called Blown. So I was really interested in the idea of the everyday, how something can be affected by perhaps how we just go, it's an everyday occurrence, everyone does it, everyone either has a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and there's that initial blow. Could be on your soup bowl, could be on a soup spoon. But what happens if we were a bit stronger than we thought we were, or we could actually blow ceramics, or actually create this ripple through a very solid material structure? We all do it differently, and this is what I found fascinating, because the way I blow, I could be very aggressive and tea everywhere, or someone could be a lot softer. How would we capture this? So this is a series of bone china cups and saucers that all have a different frame. They're just caught that one moment in time. So you've got different ones. You've got, I think the first one was, I can't remember, it's like 24 frames, and you've got the middle one is like 145 frames, and the last one is actually come through and back over. It's reverbed within the boundary of the saucer itself. And what I found interesting about this project is that the way I created this project is I used a microphone. So one of my big bugbears in life is using, here we go, it's a good example. Imagine this was a mouse or your computer. You're doing this movement to control, you're doing a horizontal flat movement to control a vertical motion. It's not natural, makes no sense. Shouldn't you be doing the same thing? So I created a peripheral where I could blow into the computer and affect the three-dimensional model. So, and this was fascinating, because then there was little bits of kind of decoding and post-processing to smooth all the kind of crazy, exaggerated ripples out. But it did end up creating a very, very natural object itself. So this kind of led me on to kind of thinking, well, how can we all do this? How can we have access to this? How can we all co-design? And I was interested in creating an object. I wasn't particularly wanting to make an app, because everyone makes apps, it's super cool. But I was kind of interested in how you can use what the kind of application is, and what the tool of an iPad is. So this is an object where you can you go on, a little bit of spiel, and you can upload, there's a couple of sets of cups and saucers, and you choose the one you want, and then you blow into the iPad itself. You go, and it starts to ripple. It goes crazy if you want it. You can go softer, and then at any point you can just freeze frame, snapshot that, and it saves it. At that point, it uploads it to Twitter, and then what it does, it sends a collaborative tweet to me and whoever has actually created the design with. And I found that fascinating, because it was mainly an exhibition tool for people to actually use and go out and use it. You need a little peripheral to make it work really good. It's too sensitive. When we're designing the app itself, it would pick up many vibrations. If someone's walking, it was doing the classic kind of Jurassic Park T-Rex vibration, and the whole cup was bouncing off it. And I found that fascinating. So we redeveloped it again. It's still in the App Store, but it's not great. You can see Mark trying to find it. And the way we looked at it is that we're changing it again, so then it's more of an exhibition interaction piece. And we've got now got the coding for it. So you click it, it collects the three-dimensional data, it sends it to Shapeways in Holland, and it will send you back a three-dimensional ceramic cup. exactly how you've made it. So it's it is a collaborative between my practice and your interaction. And I really like this. I don't know how I feel about it, because in case some of the cuts, and they're horrible, I don't know how I feel I'm connected to it, but just now we're trying to get the beta testing, getting it really succinct, and how we can get because the quality of 3D printing ceramics isn't great, so you wouldn't really get the same bone china versions that I've made, but it's an interesting project. It's something definitely can take further. It's starting into a studio. There's a studio app we're creating as well, where you'll see some other projects, even with the birds, where you'll be able to go up to a mop, go up to a light bulb, and it will recognize the light bulb, and it will start flying using kind of augmented reality, a moth around the piece itself, and you can snap it and then create that exact moth sculpture. So we're really interested in how you can almost use the computer's eye, or webcam, however you want to call it, as kind of your insight into how my studio practice works itself. So this project is called Shine. Again, this will be eventually kind of connected to the app itself. And I was interested in how, kind of reflective objects, why are we kind of associated to a reflective object, or how are we kind of drawn to a reflective object. I don't really do kind of amazing kind of like blingy objects in my life, but I still stop and look at something, and I wanted to know what that was, and I wanted to know what the spectacular highlight or the shine of the object was. Now this was an interesting project, because the only way I could do this was to use old technology. That sounds crazy. So it's a three-dimensional scanner, but this is one of the first. It was a planar scanner at the RCA. It's my big hairy arms that are moving it around. So it's really technical. And as the laser passes, and you can see when it passes the metal object, this red line will spark. Now it doesn't. So as it hits the metal object, it doesn't actually. It can't actually tell the difference between what reflection and what an actual material is. So all it does is sparks. And as it sparks, it creates an object. And these spikes, is an industry term for them, for me were actually the true aesthetic of the object. Perhaps what we see is what we want to see, but what actually exists if you gave reflection and shine a material property would actually look like this. And I've subsequently done it with diamonds, larger kind of cut glass diamonds as well. And the internal refraction within glass is phenomenal, and this caught it, and I 3D printed just the internal refraction of a diamond itself. And what was interesting about that is because it was amazingly kind of reflective, the spikes, I think, went up to 200 meters long potentially. But on a candelabra, they're not really that reflective. So this piece was 3D printed initially, and even at that point, it was an impossible object. The guys, and this was done by 3D Systems, and 3D Systems really questioned, well, it's a bit of an ugly thing. I mean, it's got lots of holes in it. It's not really an object that we would want to print itself, and it might fall apart. But that was good, because then it was challenging the aesthetics of the machine, the possibilities of the machine, and with almost technology's kind of problem. It was using technology's eye. Now, what was interesting with this project is that then I did a touring exhibition by the Crafts Council called Labcraft, and Max Fraser was the curator for it, and Max was kind of questioning, goes, well, could you push this project further? And I was never sure how I would take this project past the 3D printed object, because it was an impossible piece. It was wax. It was a 3D nylon object, incredibly spiky. So what I did is start working with Powder Hall Bronze, which is in Edinburgh as well. And with the help of Powder Hall Bronze and a mold maker down in London, we created this amazing kind of, I think it was 3 or 4 piece silicone mold that could capture the object itself. And that sounds weird, but because of the spikes, it's almost an impossible thing to create into wax. And it's incredibly spiky and very dangerous to make itself. And then it was silver plated by Hamilton Inches. And that was an interesting process as well, trying to give Hamilton Inches, who make some of the most beautiful objects you'll ever see, perfection of every piece, this thing. And they were just going, really, Joe? They would just bend it. But it was an interesting piece, and subsequently it's done well. So this is a new project just now, and it's called The Secret Life of Shadows. And I was interested in kind of, it started off by a project by a perfumer who was interested in using getting me to design a perfume bottle, and then he would make the scent to go with the perfume bottle. Usually it's vice versa, usually the scent and the perfume bottle. He was interested in why I made an object itself. So I was looking at actually what the perfume bottle's function was. I wasn't going to make flowers on it, I wasn't going to give it that kind of decorative perfume bottle sense. I was interested in, well, what is the perfume bottle? And the perfume bottle for me it was a function of just this vaporizing using the button itself. And I kind of started looking at it as, well, it was very similar to how we breathe. So this object's just breathing, it's anticipation. And then it's breathing in, and it's breathing out, and then as it deflated, and as it slowly comes back to life itself, that's when it's back to its former self. But we don't see that. It's all hidden, it's all within its soul itself. So I was interested in how the shadow could embody the soul. Well, my idea of the soul itself. So this is just the material object showing how it's done. Again, this was an interesting because I was asked to make 50 bottles. I don't like mass production. And even though 3D printing makes it dead easy to do this, I was interested in using animation. So I slowed this down to show you that each one of these frames could be a new bottle. So every single person will have a very individual bottle. And this is working again. We're trying to, again, find new coding to work with either an iPad or some sort of interaction. So you can go up to an everyday object. It could be a wine glass that's breathing. So you actually could use the iPad. It'll recognize this iPad, it'll recognize the form of the wine glass, but animate its surroundings. It'll animate a shadow attached to the piece itself. So again, it's this different side of this intangibility, but something that could be every day within technology. And these are the final objects. So I went down more of a kind of object route rather than actually making functional pieces, because we're still developing the functionality of it itself. So these are about 400 high. They're quite big pieces. Shadows are quite big. A lot of perfume for your money there. And they're 3D printed using Z-Core, and then I hand sand them back to get this very beautiful, beautiful finish, and then they're sprayed by a car manufacturer actually to make them a very kind of seductive black finish. A lot of the animations I create, I like creating individual scenes. I like using this kind of theatre mode of using this individual set that everything works behind, everything works within itself. Using the reflections or using very kind of white backgrounds. So because I've been doing this for a while, and I've been using technology for a bit, I was getting a little bit annoyed about the amount of new technology, new kind of pieces that are coming, especially in the craft sector, that I didn't really think required to exist. And that was obviously very opinionated of me, because actually maybe some of my stuff isn't required to exist. But it was actually why. What's the narrative behind these objects? Are they just pretty objects? Are they just, are craftsmen or designers getting seduced by technology, and they're just using technology for technology's sake? Does it have to be in your toolbox? Because it says, so I wrote this article for Crafts magazine, and talk about the dangers of going digital. I was just questioning, and it was also education as well, is that if you see a lot of students who will go straight to a laser cutter to make a circle, or cut a bit of wood, just cut the bit of wood. Use a bandsaw, use a saw, use a ruler, actually learn the material properties of what you're using first. Then use your technology if you need to and require to, and it's imperative for your piece to work, but don't use it as the easy option. And this is what I was finding, this is what this article was about. I also used the line along the lines of craftsmen are being seduced like Barry White with technology, quite like that. So this was a project that I collaborated with Chris LeBroy. And Chris is a phenomenal digital font, digital type artist. And I was interested in how he creates these static images and his use of hyper-surrealism within his work itself. I challenged him to, it was a beer chat, let's call it, into kind of, I was questioning the power of like my voice or the power of music or sound itself. So that's when Dancing Britney Vaz comes back, because he fired a quick render back going, oh, is this what you're after? And it was just creating a graphic equalizer out of a vase, and that really isn't what I was looking for. I was looking how you could materialize sound within an object itself. So this is the idea, where music in general is ambient sound, it's everywhere, there's no direction to it, well, just now there's direction from speakers. I was interested in how you could find directional sound. So I started looking at using a film score, or a part of a film where you actually had this points of time when it's going from A to B, or B back to A again, and actually having these points where sound can travel across a plane or a field itself. So I worked with Chris quite a bit to create this environment, and we used a scene from American Beauty. And it's obviously a phenomenal film itself, but it was the point where they're having dinner and they're all starting shouting about, just realised he's quit his job. And I was interested in actually the power of the voice going across, but my focus wasn't on the actors, the focus was on the objects, these pieces that were caught in the crossfire of this argument itself. They had nowhere to move, and I was interested in how do they feel? Where's the human element of that? And that's where sound comes across really well, of how you actually project it and how you feel it. So we started creating, I don't know what's next, I won't press it, different coding within programming so that we could give the teapot a masculine kind of feeling. So it wouldn't take that much kind of offence to something else, but it would to something. We gave all these genders and different responses, and it ended up in quite an interesting piece, but we did just use the sound to affect it at the end of the day. So this is a bone china teapot. As you can see, the power of the objects come from both sides. This is actually just when two voices have passed. Bowl. This is a lampwork glass as well. So it was again, all these pieces were 3D printed, and then I was trying to find people I could work with to make them. Initially, for all the functional-esque looking pieces, I went to Stoke to ask these guys to try and kind of make the pieces again, but they couldn't make them because they were approaching teapots as a functional teapot. So I had to end up working with someone who worked in a sculptural sense, because then they approached it as just a piece of sculpture and an object. So these are solid silver knife and fork as well. The knife for me works so well because you really see the power of the voice going through it and these pulses. And it's not the classic kind of oscilloscope kind of wavelengths. It's actually got this feeling, it's got this volume and form to sound itself. The jug. And this is a big lick of a thing. So. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I just wanted now to have a bit of a discussion with the three of us and to open it up to the floor. I mean, I've personally got lots of things floating about in my head about the discussion and presentations from our speakers. I mean, just first of all, I was very interested in this notion of what do we mean now by kind of craft. I think one of the kind of things for me that comes up in both Jeff and Alan's presentations is about I think really, you know, when we were in, in design education, we very much learned about how to make things, the materiality of materials, of ceramics, of textiles. And my feeling is that in both of your presentations, it's very important, that understanding of materiality. And I wondered what your thoughts were about the role of digital tools, particularly in design education, where we're seeing less and less kind of that kind of tacit understanding and knowledge of materials. If you want to start.
Within my practice, it's important to understand material to the point, if I'm rendering an object that is wooden, I'll have that wood next to me. I need to have that connection. I need to make sure I'm not making mistakes, or I'm not making a big kind of, I need to understand if I'm going to cut a bit of wood, what it feels like. And that feeling can then be emulated within an animation or within a final object. Now within education, it's quite interesting because a lot of students are looking to embrace new technologies. But surprisingly, not many, the learning curve in new technology they find a lot more they find it very difficult to kind of get on that curve. But the new obviously that's the current generation, the generation that's going to be coming, they'll be so fluent with new technology and new languages. It's going to be quite scary, because students need to understand the basics of a material before they get to challenge that material. They need to understand, if they're throwing clay, understanding the basics of either firing the piece or actually what it does if you leave it out, or does it dry, how thin can it go. And that's my job, to try and let students understand this. It's something there is there. I don't think you're going to get, well, you might get a full digital crafts undergraduate very soon, I don't know. But then the notion of what crafts is, it's a tooling at the end of the day, so do we need to prefix everything with digital? My big issue is that I try and tell any curators that work with my work that they don't need to push the 3D printing side of it, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be known as a 3D printing guy. At the end of the day, that's my practice, and the work should speak over and above its process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Jeff in a way there, where you give the example of a student wanting to cut a circle out of a piece of wood and going straight to a laser cutter. I mean, we get that at CAT as well, where students are coming down and basically reproducing things that they could easily do up in the textile print room. So it's really, I mean, I don't know, you could start to talk about the realities and the costs of it come into it as well, because textile screen printing, I suppose I don't know if you can compare that with cutting pieces of wood, but facilities in colleges now are going down, so people don't have access to those tools in the same way that you would have saw. So I think for textile students, it's a slightly different thing where, you know, if you're going to print a polka dot, do you say to somebody, go up and expose a screen, or do you print it digitally? Because the chemicals used to expose a screen, the time, is it an important thing to do it traditionally? Yes. Does it make sense? I'm not so sure. Does the market that most textile designers are designing for, you know, I am a designer for a market, I'm not an artist. I don't see myself as being an artist, so there's a difference there. If I'm designing a print for Habitat, I don't really care whether I'm designing it in a traditional way or digital. It doesn't really make any difference to me. But I think it's different if you're creating an art piece and you've got more, I mean, when you design for freelance, it's a very different thing to the sort of area that you're in. So I'm not saying that for all of textiles, but I think there's certain rules apply to certain environments, and I think, but I understand what you're saying. I had somebody come last week and ask me to do something, and they worked in a print studio and they had access to screen printing technology, and they wanted to print a panel which they could have screen printed in their own studio, but they wanted to do it digitally, and the aesthetic of it was traditional. I had to talk them out of doing it and try and persuade them to do it themselves, because I knew that my process actually wasn't very good for it. Our machines are great for printing 36 million colours, but very difficult to print one colour well. So I have that argument sometimes with people who have that, but people are kind of slowly moving away from traditional textile printing, which is a shame, because I would like to get back into it again. I miss exposing screens. So it is a very valid argument. It's a difficult one, but I'm not in a position where I can, when customers say, I mean, I'm more in the position with the people that you're working for when you send them a product. You're saying they're ringing you up and saying, really, do you want to silver plate this? I mean, I could say that to a lot of customers when I get files in the middle of the night from wherever. But, you know.
From your traditional training, that it helps where you are now using technologies, because you can approach it differently.
Absolutely. I think people who come in from just a pure digital background look at design very differently. They don't understand some of the things that I even say or ask them if they've considered, because it's being lost. The tradition, not at Glasgow, I might add, and probably most of the Scottish colleges are still got a traditional facility. And I think that's really, really important. Even if when they go out into industry, more and more so, they're just using digital for the design part of it. Because as I say, 98% of textile production is still traditional.
I think I'd just like to kind of open it up to the floor now for any questions.
Firstly, my name's Katie. I'm curator at the exhibition up at Gayfield, so I've experience with Alan. Firstly, thanks very much. There was really interesting presentations from both of you, so different, so kind of opposite in so many ways. But I was just wondering, kind of independently, I'm not sure how to frame this question, but have you seen sort of major changes in your industry through sort of digital production, or have you affected those changes. I think sort of specifically working with an exhibition that's looking at historic textile techniques and using Alan to print the exhibition basically, and what kind of questions those probe, and how you say that really digital printing doesn't actually save on fuel in the long run. So I'd just be interested to see if you've sort of seen changes, or sort of what those kind of changes are.
I mean, I suppose the change that I see, and rightly or wrongly, is that what I offer people locally and externally from the UK is the potential to produce something. So we have helped and contributed to so many new businesses in Scotland because they couldn't have done it any other way. So do I see the industry changing? Yeah, absolutely. When I was a student and I graduated from Glasgow School of Art, I was lost as far as production facilities. So in a very basic sense, I think that it has changed the landscape of freelance designers, their accessibility to the equipment, the placement of it. Even just being in Glasgow, there's not very many other places, and I think there's another place now. We're not the only place in Scotland, but we've got a very open access where people can come in and get advice as well, because it's not just about sending files. A lot of people still want to come and ask us about the handle of the fabric, the depth of the tone, which is things that I learned through traditional process. So that's when you were asking how important was it for me to learn how to dye something when I was a student, or to screen print something, or to learn about discharge or flock printing, or all of those things that were traditional. That, sometimes I forget it, but it's good to have that in the locker. So, but there's a lot of stuff that I do sometimes I think, would that be better if it wasn't happening? Because of the accessibility to it. So that's the question, but I've got a machine to pay for, so I don't turn work away. So.
I think what it's allowed is a lot of new graduates or existing design companies to actually kind of prototype three-dimensionally and quite openly using either MakerBots, a lot more kind of desktop 3D printers. This is from the 3D printing side of things. And clients want to see an object. They're kind of over this 3D render phase that everyone went through, fantastical kind of visualizations of it, either an object, complete fly-through. They just want to hold it. And obviously you can go, that comes from kind of the more traditional product design through below-flow modeling, that kind of sense. But actually having a 3D printer has allowed many companies. I interned at Asprey in London, and they were 3D printing a lot of their Chinaware. They would then give it to a master mold maker who'd remake it completely by hand because it wasn't good enough. It wasn't the high enough detail they require, and then mold making. But what it did do is that it gave him a three-dimensional representation of the object. Now there's a lot of breakthroughs of 3D printing glass and through pâte de verre processes. There's a lot of stuff in the States just now, or down in Lancashire, and ceramic printing as well. And this is perhaps where my issue comes, is that people are printing these very interesting, very intricate kind of internal geometries, almost impossible, well, would be impossible by hand to model make it in the traditional sense. But the quality is not as good. And that's what I find really interesting, is that people are still using this as prototyping, but it won't supersede the handmade yet. So I think where it is helping industries kind of get out there, they're still going to rely on traditional processes for a very long time. It's making a lot of millionaires 3D printing just now, especially a friend of mine who does 3D skulls, Josh Harker in Chicago, and he just put one on, it was either Etsy or different online marketing or online kind of fundraising, Kickstarter I think it was, and he just churned out like $75,000, $80,000 worth of these things, and he can put it out there because it's hitting a mass market. It's allowing social media as well. No longer we have to just sit there. You still have to do the exact same amount of kind of publicity of your work. You have to go and find the people who want to look at it. But a lot more people will see your work, and word of mouth changes completely now. Yeah, it's the new technologies in many senses has definitely helped, especially in Scotland. And there's been a lot of kind of funding towards kind of Scottish new startups to embrace new technologies, and that could be different types of media. It could be 2D, 3D. And I think it's a very healthy way, but at the same time, some people, going back to the initial point of graduates who are only working in a digital sense, don't really have that touch to something that's tangible. I probably not answer your question there, Katie, sorry.
Hi, you were saying that most of the 3D printed objects then end up you source companies that will cast them in different materials so you actually have a tangible object which you can, be it in bronze or glass. And I was just wondering, as time goes on and sort of less and less skills are taught within colleges or within apprenticeships and things, actually how many, that technology, as you're talking about the mould making, the actual casting, what's going to happen to that? As you say, it's so exciting that people go, oh, 3D printing, but do we need to be actually spending equal amounts of money on companies that can actually turn those 3D printed things into actual objects as well? I mean, also the other thing I was going to say, do you look locally as well for companies that can do that, or do you always just look for the best, and whether that be in the Czech Republic or whether that be?
I try and find the best, because I don't like the process that can take away the point of the project, the narrative of it. I prefer to be local. The UK, unfortunately, is a very expensive place to make objects. It's not helping itself. UK, Scotland, England, who knows what it's going to be. And yes, things like mould making is massively important. You can 3D print in gold and all these different materials now as well. There's a good story, another friend of mine called Kevin Smith, who is a business manager for Voxeljet, which is a huge 3D printing company in Germany, and this printer can do 2.5 meter long depth prints. Now it prints in sand, so then you can bronze cast straight into the sand mould. So, but Kevin's background is he's a foundry maker and a pattern maker. But he realised that he had to step forward to keep in touch with these companies that don't have a great amount of R&D cash to spread on a project. You need to make a cheaper way of making these tooling and prototype tooling. He completely admits that the finished pieces aren't as good as the old school way of doing it, but they're getting there. They're getting there. My problem with that kind of technology is that you're making a sand cast mould, and once you pour the bronze in, you burnt it out, you crumble it, that's it gone. So that could be a, I don't know, £30,000 tool disintegrated on the ground in front of you. Where if I go traditional wax process, it means I can make multiple of the same thing. It does need taught at universities. It's a massive, massive issue. Because it's great having these models, but you see some great 3D printed objects and terrible models afterwards. It's the bane of my life when I see it. It does need taught, and I think it will be, but then again, this is perhaps where a new style of course, where it is traditional and new processes come together, but there isn't as big an uptake on it as you think just now. There's a lot of schools interested in it, and they have fab labs, they have digital departments, and they have 1 or 2 staff members that have research specialists within that. But you need more than that just now for education to bring onto it, even though they're spending so much money in 3D printing, and well, seems like textile printing as well. But you need these people to kind of pioneer it and push it forward, and you need this new generation of people that are interested in both the tangible and the intangible. It's how you bring it together into this one kind of beautiful relationship. Then you'll get really exciting objects. Just now we're exciting, but not fantastic yet. We're getting there.
I don't know if that question applies to me, but I think the textile department, if I speak for the staff there, have had, and you could probably speak about that, the difference. And when I was a student, I designed things and then I had to work out how to produce them. I get students bringing me down designs on memory sticks now, and I give them a piece of beautiful fabric, and they've had no part in it for part of the thing. Some of them come down and they do internships and they learn the process, but the machine does a lot of work for you, there's no doubt in that. I mean, obviously they still make the design, but so much of the successfulness, or the happy mistake, as we used to call it in textiles, that doesn't happen so much with digital print. So I think the staff in the department have found it difficult from an assessment point of view in, how do you assess prints? How do you teach it? It's definitely a thing that they've had issues with.
Yeah, serendipity is something that technology doesn't really like, is it? It was interesting with the wine glass that I created. It was 3D printed, and I sent it down to a lamp worker in London, and he had to copy it, and it came back better because it had that human touch to it. It had things 3D printer could do, but he couldn't do because of just the gravity of the way he was making. And I found that fascinating because it made the piece so much better. so there is areas that people need to work on both of them. So.
And I kind of think as well that people, when they think of a digital output, they're less likely to accept mistakes. I have customers who, if the thing doesn't come, if they had screen printed it and did it themselves and it earned it up being 50% different, they would have accepted it and rejoiced in it. Whereas if you send something for digital output and it doesn't come back what it looks like on a screen, they just won't accept it. You know, so there's people's perceptions to what digital process is very interesting.
All right. How important textile people feel that construction should be there in your courses?
I think that's one thing that's really come out of the discussion today, is very much about this whole kind of process of making, of actually engaging with materials, of actually going through the whole kind of process, and also learning through making mistakes, or do we call them mistakes, or, you know, design is all about finding out how things can be subverted, as, you know, kind of, I think Jeff was talking about, and how things can be transformed. And I think that is the danger that we do have with technology and digital, is that we become removed from that kind of hands-on craft making process, and our understanding of that materiality you know, is so important. And I think today we've talked very much about the kind of pros and cons of using digital tools, and it's interesting from Jeff's perspective about his interest in kind of subverting that, but also that whole change in what our I suppose our specialisms are. You know, digital technology perhaps allows us to perhaps think of ourselves as less as textile designers, but then how can we translate 3D thinking into a different type of product, whether it's knitting, or perhaps it's through glass or ceramics or metals, and perhaps we're thinking about other ways of working.
Your question was about the makeup of the product. Is that what you're saying? I mean, because that's, I find, I'm now getting so many requests from clients and students and people about production, about actually making fabric into the construction. I don't know if that's what you mean. You know, and digital printing allows you, in digital CAD design, I've done lots of work with people who have wanted to make, you know, garments where the print runs over the seams. Things like that people are interested in that. And of course then it all comes down to the quality of the sewing and that equipment. Is that equipment lying behind? And there's lots of digital equipment in mass production, laser cutting and lay planning and things like that. But that's the part where I think maybe it's lagging a little bit behind. That part of it hasn't caught up with it. People find it really hard. I know how hard it is even in Scotland to get cushions made up or tea towels made up, finding people that'll do things like that. So you think would be quite straightforward. I don't think there's a lot of textile students coming out and are interested in filling those positions. Everybody wants to be a digital designer. There's not so many people who are interested in doing a run of 5,000 cushions.
This is for Jeff. So I found the application of movement, sense of material and form very inspiring, how you challenge all that, and I'm very curious to learn how you would approach color or challenge.
You're not the first person to have asked me to, why don't I use any colour in my work? It would be interesting again. I did do some work with patterns and of how you could affect the object again if it was embodied within, if the pattern was embodied within the object you were affecting. And it didn't, at that point within the project, especially with Crossfire, because it was ornate, almost not Wedgwood or Royal Dalton-esque patterns around the vases, it didn't really affect it from, well, it didn't add to the project. If anything, it distracted it. It gave another layer that didn't really require it. It would be something I'd be interested in doing. I'm not there yet. With colour, yeah, there is something there that you could affect. Well, I suppose that the natural one, it could be if someone's happy, then you're shouting at the person, how does that object change to red and anger? Does it go through phases? Is there a spectrum of sound? Which I find, can you see, well, how you see sound through colours as well? There could be connection there. There is a lot of work to be done on that. It's just something I've not yet, I'm not there yet. I'm kind of looking at, I'm still looking at time, but looking at stillness now as the next body of work of how you embody something that, because nothing's still, everything, even though that's objects, still it's actually moving because of the particle makeup of the material itself. So there's different layers of that. Colour, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'll find a way. There's something there.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to have to wrap up now, literally. I'm just going to hand over to John, but first of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much for the questions, and and thank you to the speakers today, Alan and Jeff, who I think have given a really kind of extensive kind of overview of where kind of digital tools are at the moment, and also kind of both the pros and cons of using digital tools, and the importance very much still of kind of the tacit knowledge of materials and the tactile understanding of craft practice. Thank you.
To Josie, Jeff and Alan, thank you very much indeed for a very stimulating evening. Thanks very much for coming. I thought I'd knock that off. Again, thank you on behalf of Gayfield and on behalf of Creative Scotland, who've been our co-sponsors of the evening. You could do me a big favour by filling out your evaluation forms. And you've got a pen there too, so that'll be really great. Kirsty, thank you very much for your help tonight. Kirsty's going to give you a little brochure all about what's happening at Gayfield. And thanks again to everyone at Creative Exchange. And here's to the making hand. Thanks very much.